Welcome everybody. I'm glad to see such a great turnout tonight. Thank you all for coming. My name is Asch. I'm the co-chair of the Sacramento area chapter of the ACLU. My pronouns are he, him. And I'd also like to remind everyone that we're meeting tonight on land taken from indigenous people. In our area, it's the Miwok, Yaqui, Potwin, and Maidu tribes. I really appreciate so many people coming out from the community. I appreciate our speaker, Serna, coming to talk to the community tonight. And I especially appreciate all the members of the ACLU Sacramento chapter who helped plan the event. Here at the chapter level, we're not paid ACLU staff members. We're all just grassroots volunteers. So people gave up their free time to help plan this event, even though they have day jobs, other responsibilities. And I especially want to thank Donne and Jasper, who are on the chapter board, who have agreed to be our moderators tonight. I know they both have particularly demanding day jobs, and so I really appreciate the time and the work they've put into planning the event tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jasper.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out. My name is Jasper James, and I am the co-chair of the communications portion of the Sacramento ACLU board. And before we begin, I wanted to say something briefly about today being the 5th anniversary of Ellis and Ferguson, Missouri, killing Michael Brown. So, because of Michael Brown, the system in Ferguson is facing reform and oversight, and from more diverse representation from local officials. And I'm saying this because you being here, change does happen. And so it's very important that you're all here right now, and we appreciate it greatly. So while the anniversary of Michael Brown's death reminds us of pain and defeat in Ferguson, the community can turn that pain into power. And over time, we can see real progress both in Ferguson and around the country, and maybe even see that arc here in Sacramento with AB 1185. So with that said, I'd actually just like to take a moment of silence for our brother Michael Brown. What is remembered is lived. Lives on. Asch. We're going to try to move through this as quickly as possible, folks. I know it's Friday night. Had a long week this week. So first, the findings of September 2012 polling conducted by Cholson Research, as summarized in the previous memo, reflects a statewide shift in how the voters of California view criminal justice issues of our time. Voters believe our elected officials should invest much more into alternatives to incarceration than they are doing now, and they do not want taxpayer dollars used to build more prisons and jails. Specifically, voters strongly support reforming pretrial release policies to require supervised monitoring in the community instead of jail while awaiting trial, and they plan to hold elected officials accountable for not supporting this reform. So with that said, I'd like to introduce and bring up some of our community members, starting with sorry, technology. Okay, so in the audience, I believe we have Tifanei, Ressl-Moyer, if you want to come on up. And welcome Tifanei here. And I believe I was looking for Janice, but I'm not sure if she's here tonight yet. Is Rhonda Kravitz in the building? And Donne Shelby. Donne Shelby. Okay. So at this time, I'd like to introduce the other co-chair that's hosting tonight and moderating, John Stoller. He is the Sacramento ACLU Chapter Criminal Justice Chair. John, come on up.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Before we get into what I'm going to cover, first we're going to have the union members say a few words, a few comments about their experience in working with law enforcement in Sacramento County. I guess we'll start with Tifanei.
As you've heard twice already, my name is Tifanei. I have been invited to share my experience here because I am a plaintiff's attorney for a lawsuit against Sacramento County. We brought a lawsuit about a year ago for the dangerous conditions in the Sacramento County Jail, both in the main jail that's downtown and RCCC that's in North Road. We had been working and investigating, well, let me back up and say who we are. I work for an organization called Disability Rights California. Disability Rights California is a law firm called the Protection and Advocacy Agency for the state of California. Every state has one. We are mandated to do investigation of different facilities or systems that care for or protect individuals with disabilities. And unfortunately, a large sum of people who have disabilities are housed in our jails. So we began an investigation in Sacramento County some years ago. And we found a number of things. We found that there is extreme isolation, solitary confinement. Found that people were being housed in a very small cell for 23 and a half hours each day. And they're let out for maybe 15 minutes for a shower, maybe 15 minutes to try to reach a family member, no matter what time at night. We also found that there was no accessibility in the cells. So imagine if you're using a wheelchair for mobility and you can't navigate your cell. And if you do manage to navigate around your cell, you can't use the shower because there's no accessible means to use a shower. If you're falling on the floor, if you're slipping, if you're falling, if you try to hold yourself up. You also can't enter an attorney's booth. I've had a number of clients who would try to talk to me and they would have to hoist themselves out of their chair, use their upper body to try to get to the steel booth that's not movable inside the cell and have a conversation with their attorney about what their rights are. We also found that there is a lack of, inadequate mental health care. So if you're familiar with kind of how the criminal justice system seems to work, a lot of people end up in jail because they don't have access to mental health services. And then when they get in jail, the way that our Sacramento County Jail is structured, they don't have timely access to mental health care. There's a lack of staff. There's a host of other issues that we identified these number of years ago. I think it started 2015. So we identified these issues and then we drafted a report hoping that it would spark something. What are we going to do? Who's going to be engaged? Which part of the government is going to raise their hand and say, okay, we're going to deal with this? And we got some response from the Sheriff's Department that said, okay, maybe there are some constitutional violations that you've identified. What can we do? And they hired their own experts who went in and looked at some of the very issues that we identified and a little bit more. And what they found was that not only were there cells that did not have accessibility features for folks with wheelchairs or other mobility impairments, but there were no accessible cells in all of the jail. They found that people who were likely to be held in solitary confinement were primarily people with serious mental health illnesses. They also found that with the amount of people who were being housed in the jail, almost 4,000, there was a sufficient lack of staff. So even if they had desired to provide adequate programming for people, adequate out-of-cell time, they didn't actually have the means to do it. So we began negotiations. We began working towards building a plan to address some of these constitutional inadequacies. When I say constitutional, the Constitution says that you may not put someone through cruel and unusual punishment. And the Supreme Court and other courts have said that putting people in solitary confinement, not giving them access to a shower, phone calls, time outside of their cell, is a violation of the 8th Amendment. Not only that, there are a number of studies that say that once you're placed in solitary confinement, you have about 14 days before you start experiencing irreparable mental health deterioration. And it's even worse if you go into that cell with already having mental health issues, which is about 60% of our population in Sacramento County Jail. Last year, around beginning of July, we'll say, we realized that we weren't going to get where we needed to go with the negotiations, so we filed a lawsuit. We filed it in federal court looking for a court-enforceable agreement about what needs to change. After that, we filed what's called a preliminary motion for we filed a motion for preliminary injunction. That means that we were saying that there is an emergency that needs to be addressed before we get to the rest of the issues of the lawsuit. And that emergency, we said, were people who have serious mental illnesses inside solitary confinement. We need to get them out immediately. And shortly after that, we came to a settlement agreement with the county. And we have filed that settlement agreement before the court proposed settlement agreement. Just yesterday, the court recommended that they accept the settlement agreement. And I'm just going to share with you, because I know we have limited time for us to talk, what some of those things in the settlement agreement are. Part of the settlement agreement explicitly recognizes that the type of repairs that are needed to care for people in the jail are very, very expensive. And we believe that while the repairs are being made, the county must invest in reducing the jail population. Because like I stated before, it's very expensive to run a jail of almost 4,000 people. Many who can be better served in the community with access to adequate mental health services and adequate housing services. The consent decree also says the county agrees to hire more staff to meet the mental health, medical, and programming needs of people in the jail. They agreed to change the actual infrastructure of the jail to create to create accessible units. Accessible meaning that people with mobility impairments can navigate. The county agrees to enhance some of their tracking systems to be able to sufficiently identify mental health needs and medical needs, as well as tracking people with disabilities. Because you can imagine there's different parts when you enter the jail. There's booking, there's housing, there's classification, there's getting to medical care, and there's many people that you're touching along the way. If you're not tracking which people have disabilities, you probably are going to be missing some certain accommodations that you need. I had one client who had hearing impairments. When he was booked, people recognized he had hearing impairments. When he was housed, people did not recognize he needed hearing impairments, and he was disciplined for not hearing when he needed to get up. He was disciplined for not hearing when he needed to eat, over and over again. And not to go off on a tangent, but just to share, if you have a hearing impairment in a place like a jail, and nobody knows, even if you're not placed in solitary confinement, you are, in effect, in solitary confinement. And it is excruciating. Finish in 2 minutes. And the county also agreed to move people with serious mental illness out of solitary confinement conditions and to limit the use of solitary conditions altogether. Excuse me, not altogether, but there are this is a very long consent decree. There were a lot of issues that the county has agreed to address. And you can find some of those conditions on our website. It's disabilityrightsca.org. I really believe that it's very important for the community to be both aware of and engaged in this process. I think that for any type of oversight, you should be aware of both that the jail has to have, if you're going to house this many people, you have to have sufficient funding to care for them. basic medical care, basic mental health care, access to a shower. But at the same time, there are many people in the jail who don't need to be there. And that means that you have to simultaneously invest in reducing the population for folks who don't need to be there. An oversight committee, sheriff, and other public officials need to be aware of that. Thank you for inviting me.
Next up, we have Rhonda Rios.
Good evening. I'm very glad to be here and to see all these folks attending this incredibly needed community forum. I have worked with Sacramento Immigration Coalition. My main work is with immigrant rights, but Tifanei and I work is always overlapping because I am looking at what happens in our jails and the horrific conditions that happen in our jails, whether it be RCCC or the Yuba County Jail. The Yuba County Jail has had 42 attempted suicides since 2015. The mental health conditions are horrific. The health condition services are horrific. It is overseen by CFMG, a for-profit medical group that has been sued by Monterey County and others. These are groups that exist for profit. So we are here to fight against that. For Sheriff Jones, we did a PRA to find out what was happening in a Public Records Act, to find out what was happening in RCCC, Rio Consembles Correction Center, in terms of immigrant treatment. We basically got no response to all of our questions. No response. No response. So we went to Brazil, the OIG, and said, this is unacceptable. All of you know what happened to that OIG. He's no longer there. And so we said, we need to fight for an independent civilian review board. One that's not only independent from the Sheriff's Department, but also from the politics by having a fixed budget and a board membership that is majority nominated by civic and community organizations, by our civil rights organizations, so that you know of those that have experienced abuses by our sheriffs and our police, that they are on this board. This structure would ensure a community voice and a perspective in discipline and in reviewing police policies and practices. For us, as I said, it has to be majority nominated by civic organizations, the rest by the mayor and lawmakers. But it needs to set the tone for the entire composition of the board. What we want also is to make sure that it has a broad scope to review complaints, including the adjudication of cases involving excessive use of force, abuse of authority, unlawful arrest, unlawful stops, unlawful searches, discourtesy or disrespectful behavior, use of offensive language, theft, and discriminatory behavior. We want that OIG's office to have a civilian complaint review board, such that they have the authority to conduct independent investigations, and at the heart of this authority must be the ability to subpoena witnesses and documents, including internal police disciplinary documents, medical records, surveillance footage, and other materials which are relevant to an investigation. We also want to make sure that there's discipline possibilities, that once the civilian board's professional staff complete its thorough investigation and the board substantiates an allegation of misconduct, the board's findings of fact will be binding on the sheriff, who will then determine discipline based on those facts and guided by a pre-negotiated disciplinary matrix. We want to make sure that there are audit policies and practices in place that are not limited to investigating individual allegations of misconduct, that they are broader. We want to make sure that there is secure funding, that this board must be free from political manipulation. We want to make sure that there is public access and reporting. How many times have we asked the sheriff for documentation and statistics not to get any statistics? Right now, we went before Natoli's office and had an incredible visit with Supervisor Natoli, saying, we've asked for a Truth Act form, and we need statistics. The Department of Justice has statistics from the sheriff's office. He does not put them on his website. For transfers to ICE, there were 99 transfers to ICE in 2018, of which 26 were for vehicle violations. What does that mean? The LA County Sheriff has said, he's new, he said, we are reducing substantially the misdemeanors and felonies that cause transfers for our people, and we will not allow ICE into our jails. This sheriff invites ICE into the jails, and he lets them look at the databases. That has got to stop. We're also upset, I don't know if many of you know, and Serna knows about this, the OIG came out with an RFP. We only found out about this when we happened to be searching the web the other day. We had asked with this OIG that when this RFP comes out and the job description comes out, there should be community input into this. Why was there not community input into this? How will this person be selected? It closed on May 24th. There was only one applicant, so they're going to go out again. Now you have a chance to ask for community input into what should be in this OIG and how strong this OIG should be. We also want to make sure that when you have a committee reviewing it, that you should have community members who are looking on this committee to choose the candidates for this position. We also want you, when you choose your top 2-3 candidates, that you hold an open forum so we can hear what they have to say and we can have input on whether these people are going to be acceptable as an OIG in this community. We want justice. I know I only have 2 minutes. I'm going to stop, but we want justice, and justice has to be served. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there any place where you would like to direct our community members here online to find out more information?
Yeah.
I just want to briefly put it on the website.
Sure. Well, you can actually email me directly. Many of you may have met or read our op-ed on the Yuba County Jail just the other day in the Sacramento Bee. My email is Rhonda, Rios, Kravitz @gmail.com. Just email me. That address has been out there in the public, and as a result of our op-ed, we got wonderful comments like, what do you think? These people are on vacation? Do you want them to be on vacation? We need to make sure that we send them all back to where they came from. So we're very used to that. Just go to my email.
Our last community member who will be speaking this evening is Donne Shelby. Donne, you want to come on up?
Shelby. I am the mother of Shelby. My son was murdered on April 19, 2016. He took his last breath at 11:50 on that day. I encountered the Sacramento Sheriff's Department on April 19, 2016 at about 5:30. At the corner of Middle River and Sunrise Green, where my youngest daughter and I were standing in a crowd of bystanders looking over the yellow homicide table to see what had happened on Sunrise Green Drive. We were in awe because we had been there for about 3 hours at my mother-in-law's house. We left for 10 minutes to go to the store. We came back and we were perplexed at how something could happen within that span of time. I remember looking down the street of Sunrise Green, seeing a black shoe in the middle of the street, a blue towel, and about 6 deputies, a light-skinned young man with wet dreads, black basketball shorts, and red boxers, and no shirt. In April, it was pretty cold. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. As a commercial driver, we're taught to scan the road for possible dangers, so scanning is something that I do on a regular, on a daily basis. So the next 6 hours and 20 minutes were pure hell for me. 3 minutes later, my oldest daughter pulled up like a bat out of hell, jumped out of the car yelling, "Mama, why didn't you tell me your papa got shot in the head?" That's how I found out my son got shot. Whew. My mother instincts kicked in. I went over to the deputies and I asked for a description of the boy they had transported to the hospital. I advised them that what my daughter had told me. It took them 7 minutes to respond to me. As I advised them that my son was a minor. He was 6'5", short hair, afro, and skinny. At that point, they said the person that they transported to Kaiser South fit that description. Whew. By the time I reached Kaiser South, it was 6:15 exactly. I remember because I looked at the clock. When the social worker came to tell me my son was in critical condition and he was in surgery. From that Tuesday at 11:50 until Wednesday, when the news aired, I received 2 phone calls. One was from the sheriff, and none of them were from the sheriff's office. One was from the Oregon Donor Association, and the second one was from the coroner, letting us know what time they're going to pick my son's body up. I found out what the police had to say about my son, what they thought, what they investigated, less than 12 hours after he took his last breath. On the news is when I found out that they decided it was an accidental suicide. Now, they found the gun 2 streets over. Now, my question was, did he shoot himself and then bury the gun? Or bury the gun and then shoot himself? It didn't make sense. My questions were agitating them because they had no answers. Because closing the case in less than 12 hours is virtually impossible. You can't possibly know. Well, as I asked the officers, I went down to the sheriff's office. I went everywhere. I went from state of California Attorney General's office down to our local officials. I still got no answer. What I did get is a coroner's report that's saying my son had fallopian tubes, ovaries, and a uterus, plus testicles. So basically, my son was a hermaphrodite all his life, and I never knew. So, who knew that? So, with that being said, I have a problem with how business is being done for our community, for everyone, not just my family. As a tax-paying registered voter in the Sacramento area, I feel that AB 1185 will get the oversight that it's needed for justice, for our community, black, brown, white, green, and poor. Because unfortunately, I was told the reason why my son's case was not properly investigated is because we live in an economically challenged area. So basically, we was too poor for services. I don't know no other way but to be real. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm paying my tax dollars to your salary, you answer with no hesitation. I still have no police report. I still have nothing. My only legal document I have is a coroner's report. It says that my son has both male and female genitalia. Now, the reason why I support this bill is because there's 185 unsolved homicides in Sacramento County from 2003 to 2017. Now, I look for stats because numbers talk to me. Facts don't lie. People lie. Facts don't lie. That means that 77% of the rest of the department is doing better than homicide. We have 86 unsolved murders. 86 out of 185. That's something needs to be done. That's not even acceptable. After 5 months by race, there's 27% black, 29% Latino, 19% Caucasian. Our accountability for Sacramento Sheriff's Department, 525 reported complaints, 7% ruled in favor of the civilian. Use of force complaints, there was 23, 9% ruled in the favor of a civilian. Discrimination, there was 10 cases, 0% ruled in the favor of civilians. Now, I don't know about you guys, but those numbers say a lot to me. in my closing, as a taxpayer, it is our responsibility to hold a higher standards to us as citizens and to our sheriff and PD. We vote them in. We have to be vigilant to get these lazy worker boarders out of the office or train them to meet the needs of our community.
It takes a lot of courage to come up here to a room of strangers and talk about something so personal and traumatic. So thank you all, and especially thank you to Shelby. That was an incredible story. If we could have a moment of silence for her son, I think that'd be appropriate. Thank you to Shelby. You have uncommon courage. All right, so now we're going to take this more into the policy side of things. We saw in our community there is a public outcry for need for oversight. But overseeing your sheriff is a little bit different than overseeing your police department. We heard Ms. Kravitz talking about wanting the mayor to appoint people, and it just works a little bit differently when we're talking about sheriffs. So for the next about 5 to 7 minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the government code, and then we're going to bring up Phil Serna here, who is your board of supervisors, who's your supervisor for this district, who will talk about the things he's working on how to create sheriff oversight. So let's just kind of go over and set up the problem. Well, according to the ACLU of California, county sheriffs lead agencies of law enforcement officers that are vested with extraordinary authority. And they have the powers to detain, they have the powers to search, arrest, use force, and these officers are responsible for the safety and welfare of everyone that's either incarcerated in the system, but also the people in the public, right? They are in charge of the crime investigation and crime suppression. They're the ones investigating situations like Tifanei. Meaningful independent oversight and monitoring of sheriff departments can increase government accountability and transparency. But what does your sheriff actually do? Well, let's kind of go over it. First, your sheriff himself is an independently elected, autonomous police official. He has his own status inside of the county charter. He is different than the mayor of police. You can't just fire him the way a mayor of police can be terminated. He is independently elected by us, the voters, when we vote. It is on a gubernatorial election system. Now this creates a natural tension with oversight groups like a county board of supervisors or any other type of oversight group, because he has autonomy and is independently elected. What are they in charge of? Well, we talked about being in charge of crime suppression and crime investigation, and we know they're in charge of the jails, as Tifanei talked to us about today. They're in charge of the mental health treatment inside the jails. They're also in charge of the alternative to confinement that exists for someone that is convicted. They're in charge of the Sheriff Work Project program. They're in charge of the home release program. They're in charge of the ankle monitoring program. There's also numerous types of confinement. People don't fully understand that. There's pre-trial confinement, where you're waiting to go to trial. Our jail has a lot of people in pre-trial confinement. Then there are people serving the actual sentence. They are either serving a misdemeanor sentence with terms attached as a incarceration term, or they could be serving time in what's called now county jail prison, which is down at the branch, RCCC. Now, how's the sheriff been responding to problems? Well, they're also being the autonomous executive official. They're the ones that you respond to for the PRA. They're the ones that are in charge of these investigations, and they're the ones in charge of these jails. Well, what are the paths to supervision? Well, that requires looking at the government code and what can the supervisors of a county do? Because the mayor can't do anything really to the sheriff. That's not how that works. The only legislative body that can directly control the sheriff outside of the state legislature would be your county board of supervisors. Their oversight is indirect, and that's important to understand. They have a type of monetary oversight. So they can give sheriff a budget, but the courts are clear, they can't tell the sheriff how to spend the money. So they have a general budgetary power. They can't dictate how he spends it. They also have some amount of power to say whether or not the sheriff can accept or reject gifts, but at times, and depending on charters across California, that too can be limited. The County Board of Supervisors can also control certain amounts of information in the style of requiring reports from the sheriff, but that too will determine on the dictates of the charter inside that county. For instance, in 2013, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors demanded that Sheriff Baca provide a detailed report about the hiring of officers. In 2007, the board had also ordered Baca to prepare a report on premature release of a celebrity inmate, and San Luis Obispo has used this power to combat gang violence. And then finally, some counties use the government code to control how the sheriff uses property. But again, this is limited for property owned by the county. So some jurisdictions have success in saying how the sheriff can use the air fleet, for instance. But again, all that is dictated by the county. So as you can see, it's all an indirect form of supervision. Now, what we do have in Sacramento County is our charter, which does allow for different things that Serna will explain to you, Supervisor Serna will explain to you. But what is the form of direct supervision? Well, that's what you heard Ms. Shelby talking about in AB 1185, Assembly Bill 1185. Our Assemblyman, Kevin McCarty, introduced this bill, and its purpose is to authorize a county to establish a sheriff oversight board, either by action of the Board of Supervisors or through a vote of county residents. The bill would authorize a sheriff oversight board to issue a subpoena when deemed necessary to investigate a matter within the jurisdiction of the board. The bill would authorize the county to establish an office of the Inspector General to assist the board. We already have the Inspector General office, and our County Board of Supervisors is working on that. What Sacramento County lacks, though, is that subpoena power. So what is subpoena power? Well, subpoena power is the ability to order someone to do something. It's an old Latin term, and that's basically all it means. It could be an order to produce documents, it could be an order for someone to come testify, but when we're talking about it being used by a legislative body, it's typically in order to get information. So it can provide the County Board of Supervisors or the Oversight Board itself a tool to find out what exactly is going on. Now, sometimes subpoenas can also be enforced through what are called sanctions, but that's another matter. The ACLU supports this bill, and Sean Reardon, one of our ACLU attorneys, has covered the need for this bill, but now I want to read to you what Kevin McCarty said about the bill. Honest oversight of law enforcement is absolutely necessary if we want to rebuild trust between officers and the communities they serve. AB 1185 will make it clear that sheriff oversight boards have the authority to properly review the actions of sheriffs, provide transparency to citizens, and create opportunities for real change. The relationship between a board of supervisors and a sheriff is unique. Unlike the employer-employee relationship between city council and the police chief, a sheriff and a supervisor are both independently elected. The unique structure has caused confusion as to some of the governmental functions and oversight of each. A board of supervisors has the authority to set policy, vote on ordinances, and provide oversight of any county function and create billion-dollar budgets. However, when it comes to oversight of public safety, arguably the most important public service, there needs to be clarity. A sheriff's department and the principal law enforcement agencies serving Californians who live in unincorporated areas of a county. This includes large population centers. For instance, 1 million Los Angeles and 600,000 Sacramento residents are served by their sheriff's department. On a statewide basis, 39% of all officers are sheriff department officers. So what does this bill do? It would provide a chair for the oversight board. It would require any pertinence as a witness upon any subject matter to appear before the board. The bill would require any officer of the county in relation to the discharge of their official duties on behalf of the department to appear, and would allow them to produce any books. And the bill goes on, but I'm not going to spend much more time going over the bill. You all have fact sheets in front of you on your table. If you didn't get one, I will get one to you. So for now, that isn't law yet. So where is AB 1185? It's still on the Senate floor, waiting to be voted on. It got through the Assembly, It's been through committee in the Senate, but we're not there yet. The Senate hasn't voted on it yet. So if you were to have an action item today, it could be contacting your local representative in the Senate and asking him to vote on it. So let's just think about that. And now I want to introduce Supervisor Phil Serna. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, John and Jasper and Alan, and I want to thank the ACLU of Northern California for the opportunity to be here tonight. I also want to extend my thanks to the three previous speakers. I think they all articulated very well their experiences that are all relevant to hopefully the discussion we're going to enjoy a little bit later this evening. It's not always easy, let me tell you, to come to a meeting like this. I mean, I know there are a lot of people here that were in our chambers back last fall when I and a few of my other colleagues that were very concerned wanted to have the sheriff in front of not just the Board of Supervisors, but in front of the public and the media, by the way, to answer some questions. Because what transpired last summer, first with the actual incident, the killing of Mikel McIntyre, who was shot in the back by our deputies. And then, of course, we had Rick Ressl, our Inspector General at the time, came out with a report that challenged some of the findings of that and criticized them, quite frankly. And also did his job. He did his job because he was doing that in a spirit of making sure that we improve the way our law enforcement, our sheriffs at the County of Sacramento do their job so that the public is kept as safe as possible. We can avoid injury, we can avoid death. And that was what was really most troubling to me, is that here you had in our Inspector General a seasoned law enforcement officer in his own right. This is the chief of police for the city of Sacramento for a number of years, who was asked to perform, was asked to apply a critical eye to a life-changing event for a family and for a community. And how was it met by our sheriff? Well, the reaction was fairly immediate. It was basically to keep the Inspector General from continuing to perform his job. He was kept out of the jail. Remember, he or she is responsible for ensuring that any in-custody death is reviewed independently by the Inspector General. He was kept from visiting critical incident scenes after that incident. There's no way that an Inspector General can gather the facts, gather the information about a critical incident involving an officer-involved shooting if he or she is not at that scene, and at that scene in a timely manner. And so for me, it was really a pretty easy thing to do in terms of doing what I think I'm fundamentally elected to do, which is to empower the people that elect me. I think that's our reciprocal relationship, constituents and elected. And so that's what happened. We had full chambers for not just one, not just two, but I think it was about 4 different hearings over the course of a few months. And I think people were rightfully very, very pissed off. I was pissed off. And I was not afraid to not just let you know why I was angry and why I was dissatisfied, but I was very willing to work with the local media to do that. I think that's also your responsibility as an elected person. And it continues to be very frustrating. As was made mention of earlier, we haven't had an Inspector General since that incident. Rick Ressl, his contract expired, and he wasn't about to remain Inspector General. I think even if we offered to him on a silver platter, because of that experience, and I can't blame him. I don't think anyone can. But the real value of having an Inspector General, by the way, is that it's another layer of independent review. Of course, the Sheriff's Department, like most local law enforcement, has an internal affairs department. That's themselves basically reviewing themselves. We have certainly grand jury. There is a grand jury report on what happened, by the way. But the Inspector General's office is a very special one because that is really supposed to be a very focused, independent agency, an agent that is charged to do some very specific things to shed light for the public's benefit, for the Board of Supervisors' benefit. And I have to tell you, I'm here because I'm a strong supporter of AB 1185. I think it is a move in the right direction, but I do want to say that I don't think it's going to solve everything. And here's the problem, and it remains a problem, a real practical problem here in Sacramento County. Even if we had what 1185 posits, which is, you know, a new ability to apply the subpoena power, right, to force someone to supply documents, come and testify before us. What we continue to have, at least in our current sheriff, and it could be the fact that we might have it in the future sheriff, is an unwillingness to work with the Board of Supervisors, to work with anyone but himself when it comes to dissatisfaction either of performance of the Inspector General's office or the work product. That is the crux of the matter. And that's why before the change of the calendar even, after we had our 4th hearing on the subject, some will recall at that last hearing, I made a very specific amendment to the motion to move forward with, you know, the revision of the Inspector General job description, which really wasn't going to do anything in terms of getting to the point that concerns me. And my motion was this, that we should have some kind of executable document, memorandum of understanding, that is executed, legally enforceable, between the Sheriff's Office and the Board of Supervisors to agree to a third-party neutral dispute resolution process. So that if in the future there was something, anything like the McIntyre shooting, that instead of acting unilaterally and simply having a tantrum and locking the Inspector General out of the jail, keeping he or her from critical incident scenes, that before that transpired, that they go to a retired Superior Court judge, for instance, that would act as an independent mediator, listen to both sides, listen to both the Inspector General and the Sheriff, come to a conclusion about whether there is some real merit to some conclusion by either party that there was a lack of performance on one agent's in one agent's capacity or the other, and we had avoided this remaining cloud that we have hanging over us, where today the sheriff can still do what he did last summer, last fall. That's the problem. You know, I know we like to invest in terms like oversight, and I do too. That should mean something, though. And if it's not oversight, if it's just oversight and we call it a day, and even if it's oversight with subpoena power, which is a little more enforceable, great. But if we don't have some belt and suspenders here, at least in Sacramento County, I can't speak for the other 57 counties, but here in Sacramento County, I think, especially with this particular sheriff and the history of his behavior, we have to make sure this thing is airtight. And so that's why I continue to think that the dispute resolution process that I've put forth in a memo, memorandum of understanding to the sheriff, it's actually been sitting on his desk for 2 months now. It's been sitting on the desk of the Deputy Sheriff's Association as well. It's a meet and confer issue. And it's been crickets. We haven't heard anything. So, as someone mentioned earlier, there is an RFP process that's underway for another Inspector General. Well, if we get another Inspector General tomorrow, that's not in place. To me, I don't know what value we have as a community to have any kind of reliable third-party independent review. If that new Inspector General comes to the conclusion that there was some fault by our deputies, God forbid, in a life-threatening situation, and the IG comes to a similar conclusion that our last IG did, the sheriff can still do what he did. we find ourselves in the same place. Right? So I always like to end my talks with leaving with you something that you can do. So I think that again we have this great reciprocal bond, and I count on you as much as you count on me, believe it or not. I count on you to fill our chambers when necessary. I count on you to fill our inboxes, to fill our phone voicemails. I think it's time that the community really understand that this option has been put forth. It's a fair option, this MOU, right? And I think that's where we need to simultaneously rally around that. At the same time, we're supporting some of the member parties bill. Because I think together, Sacramento County could actually be a model for the state of California in terms of how we take extremely seriously transparency when it comes to something as important as public safety and law enforcement. So I will end there. And I assume John, I have time for...
You can say thank you.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take up all the afternoon. So with that, I think I'll end there and maybe take a few questions if there are any. Yes?
Is the majority of the board or all of the board in support of the MOU?
So, yeah. So the question is the majority of the board or does the entire board support the MOU? Here's the challenge of serving on a board of supervisors in California. There's 5 of us with the exception of San Francisco City and County, which is a consolidated government. They have 11. When you have 5 members of a governing body that is subject to what's called the Brown Act, which is our open meetings law, you can only talk to one other, legally you can only talk to one other board member. And you can't engage in what are called serial meetings, right? So I've been working with the current chair of the board, Patrick Kennedy, who shared some very similar concerns during the course of those hearings back last fall. He and I, our county counsel's office and our county CEO, Gail, the 4 of us, worked through the substance of the MOU, and we all agreed that Patrick would be a better messenger than me to walk across the street and talk to Scott Jones about it. So that's happened, right? So that, like I said, that happened back in the spring. And every day that goes by, we don't get any feedback. And I'm willing to entertain, like, well, what do you think about it? As much as I kind of detest his MO and his behavior, I have to work in some capacity with the sheriff on behalf of a common constituency. But I can't do that without him engaging. And so I had a discussion as recently as this afternoon before coming over here with our county CEO, Gail, to make sure that somehow this has to get unstuck very quickly. Question in the back?
Yes, if we want to refer to this MOU when we're calling people, what do we call it?
I would call it the MOU on dispute resolution between the sheriff and the IG. I know that's a mouthful, but it is what. Yeah. The substance of it is about the dispute resolution process. Yes, sir.
Yeah, mine making a statement. With me going to the so-called hearing, if you open up the chart and let these people come in, a real hearing, board supervisor, city council, that's not a hearing, I don't know what it is. A hearing, you can subpoena and question both sides. You all are so far behind in what's going on here in the community, it's ridiculous. You got to go to a hearing so the public can ask these people questions.
There's a lot of people that have done that.
Other than that, you don't get nothing. Oversight, that's lost of time, because the state got a law already on legislation against oversight.
Thank you. Question?
You might have said, sorry, you didn't hear it. Is there a way that we can help with pushing and to get this MOU off the desk?
There is, but it will require the investment of time and energy on your behalf, and I understand that and I respect that. I know our meetings are long and they happen in the middle of the day. They start at 9:30 and they go as late as 9:30 at night. I know it can be very inconvenient for folks, but I will tell you in my 9-year history on the Board of Supervisors, when we have controversial issues in front of the board and we have overflow crowds that come to chambers and use your 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes to speak very passionately, with a lot of emotion, as well as writing emails, as well as making phone calls, but it's really that showing up at the board hearings. I've seen it change the minds of my colleagues. I've seen that be extremely effective. And when we work in conjunction with one another, that's when I've seen it be most effective. And I know that could be construed as maybe a throwaway answer. I hope you don't take it that way. But there's something to be said for that level of community activism, and it's most effective if you're speaking from the heart, you're writing from the heart. I will tell you, form emails are going to be less impressive than really sincere emails that explain how your family's been touched by violence in this case, and why this is so important. And so this has to be really viewed as a kind of a team sport with your electeds. And I gotta hold us accountable. I mean, I'm telling you that with an election cycle like no other that's coming up, right? And don't forget too, that's where you can have kind of the ultimate say, is at the ballot box.
Sure. This is so to answer your question. Is there any kind of alert system that we could potentially organize, perhaps on our website for the ACLU, that we can alert our community members of when these things were occurring?
Actually, you know what you could think about is a petition. I don't know if that's something that legally the ACLU, and I think you can do that, right?
We need to get it clear.
Yeah.
I've done that myself. I'll tell you just real quick story. The first time I really had a very public battle with the sheriff was when during the 2016 presidential campaign, and when he came out, he kind of subtly, very softly said, "Trouble." I kind of went apeshit. And I did. I took him to task on social media, and that was after Trump had made all kinds of sexist, racist, bigoted remarks, and I just could not believe that we're going to have the sheriff of Sacramento County support this guy. And so I actually put together my own petition. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but I went around to elected officials saying, please sign basically a letter that asked him to rescind his endorsement for Donald Trump. Of course, he didn't do it, but I got about 350 signatures. Both elected people and our constituents. And having that as a tool to really impress upon the board is also very effective. And I will also tell you this, we have one board member in particular who will remain nameless, who really respects polling. She is very, she's very impressed with kind of her own polling instruments that she puts out there very frequently to kind of test the waters and figure out how her constituents are thinking. And that's fine. That's a style of governing, I guess. It's not my style of governing, but I guess that's one way to do it. So I would assume that if the community can demonstrate by way of numbers on a certain issue, vis-a-vis a signature gathering campaign, that may actually sway them. Yes, sir.
To really bring this issue straight to our supervisor, I'm wondering how is the best approach to getting an in-person meeting with supervisors on stuff like this besides? That's something with their particularly other approach in my district.
Well, I have an open door policy. I'll take a meeting with anyone, and I think I've proven that in my almost 9 years on the board. I can't speak for my colleagues. Some of them just don't have that policy. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I can't affect that necessarily. I think what you can do is certainly convey to others that will take the meeting that your colleagues won't take the meeting, and that says something as well. Yes?
Just please, if you could clarify a little bit procedurally. So this is a memorandum. It would have to be approved by the board. And then what happens if the sheriff refuses to sign it? And then the third part is, would it be binding? Would it be binding?
So, great question. So, it would be executed by the sheriff and the chair of the Board of Supervisors. And the chair of the Board of Supervisors, by the way, rotates, right? So, I'm currently the vice chair of the board this year. Presumably, I would be chair next year. Right now, it's Patrick Kennedy is serving as chair of the board. So tomorrow, he decides he wants to execute it. You have the signature of Scott Jones and Patrick Kennedy on the MOU. And We have set it up, that's why we had our general counsel in the room when we were drafting this, so that it is binding. It's an executed legal document that says this is the expectation. Should you have a grievance with a future inspector general in terms of the work product or performance, that before you go lock them out of the jails and et cetera, that you go engage in this dispute resolution process so that we avoid everything the community went through last year.
But is the sheriff compelled to sign his end of it?
That's the leap of faith that we're taking. We have to, and who knows? We tried to draft it very carefully so that perhaps you might look at it as reasonable from the standpoint of protecting him as well. Who knows? Because there's no, maybe back of his mind he's thinking there might be a real rogue IG out there that has it out for him, and who knows? I don't know. I can only control as much as I can control. But if we had simply left this back last December with, okay, let's just focus on the job description for the Inspector General, that's empty. I mean, there's nothing there. What is that? That's what you do anyways. Like, the whole summer and fall didn't happen, where we didn't have an amazing outcry by the community that this was wrong. And I was not going to let that happen. Yes?
When you talk about that MOU, so let's say the sheriff signs it, what happens if he still locks the person out? It's an MOU, I understand it's a legally binding document.
So there are a couple different paragraphs in terms of the repercussions, one of which is we cite, and John kind of made reference to it, some of you will remember during the hearings, there is a chapter in our charter today that basically says if one agent of the county interferes with the job duties of another agent of the county, it constitutes misconduct. Now, we said that out loud at one of the hearings, and basically, the sheriff said, well, no, that doesn't apply to me. I have special constitutional, rights that supersede that. But that's why we put it there expressly, is that it would force him, by way of his execution of this, to acknowledge that.
That it's misconduct.
Yeah.
Does the MOU have any sanction provisions at all or anything like that for the misconduct or the other?
The sanctions are actually in the charter itself, and I forgot what they are, but he was really not willing to even entertain it in the context of the hearings last year, so we kind of found this different context to present it. And to your point earlier, the way that counties are structured, where you have, by the way, the sheriff is also very different than the rest of us on the Board of Supervisors because he's elected county-wide. We're elected by district, as is the DA, as is the assessor. And so that was his fallback. That was his common reaction that many of you saw last fall was, I've got constitutional privilege. I'm going to only respond to the fact that I'm county-wide elected, and I don't need to respond to you supervisors about this. And that's what we're trying to address in a thoughtful way through this particular instrument. Yes?
Maybe I don't fully understand how the legal part of this works, but why does he have to agree to your sanctioning?
He doesn't. That's the leap of faith. He could say, I'm not signing that. He could say that. But as I've explained to people in the media that have been covering the story very closely, I think that becomes the next chapter of the story, is that now we've applied a lot of forethought to something that we find reasonable, that avoids what we went through, and you still won't engage.
Sure, but what I mean is the ability to sanction in some way, budgetarily or in some other way, publicly, or with censure of some kind, he doesn't need to sign off on that.
No, he doesn't.
He can already do that right now.
No, he doesn't. I acknowledge that. I acknowledge it.
Right.
So what was going on is that the sheriff actually has his own common law and constitutional authority, and that's this disagreement that's going on. Not disagreement, that's the disagreement of this conversation. The sheriff does not work for the Board of Supervisors. The sheriff has constitutional powers and common law powers that exists in part because of the county charter, but also just in and of itself being a sheriff's office. The California Constitution directly references the sheriff's office, and in a way it's a constitutional position outside of control. This is the sheriff's argument, is that he's a constitutional officer outside the control of the Board of Supervisors. Now, the courts haven't directly addressed that question, but they've addressed the questions around it, and that's why you get decisions that say that the Board of Supervisors can't directly control how he spends his money, which is given the budget.
And I actually tested
But
that.
that's the part.
But I actually tested,
And you decide his budget.
No, but I tested that. I've tested that before, and I'll tell you how I tested it. You probably are well aware that the sheriff has a tendency to issue thousands of carry concealed weapon permits, right? Many more than his predecessors did. When I found out the cost of doing that to the county was about at least $250,000 a year just for the administration of that, right? The forms that have to get processed on. You know, I blew a gasket. I was thinking, wait a second. I don't philosophically agree with that at all. And the only real authority that I can exercise as 20% of the Board of Supervisors is to somehow keep him from spending the money. Well, if you think about it, it's tough to do that because we give him a big chunk, you know, of hundreds of millions in the budget every year to perform, you know, the duties of the sheriff's department. You can't. It's very difficult to kind of line item call out one part of that. Sure, we could have said, okay, we're going to give you $250,000 less. Then he's going to be obligated to figure out how, if he really wants to continue the CCW program, he's just going to pull it from some other part of his budget. The back?
It sounds like, you know, the MOU and all this discussion about who the sheriff listens to, it's all based on the notion that the sheriff has his own mandate, he's separately elected, and I get it, that is the state constitution. But while we're talking about legislation, why aren't we talking about going to voters and making the case of getting rid of elected sheriffs altogether?
Yeah.
Terrible idea.
Constitutional amendments are a little above my pay grade. Well, I don't know that you're going to find that authority to govern him the way that a constitutional amendment would to the charter. I think it actually has to flow from the state constitution. Yes, sir.
I actually like that idea. They said it's above your pay grade. Whose pay grade addresses that?
That's going to be someone representing you at the state capitol.
At the state capitol.
Yeah.
Now, answer me this. With that kind of autonomy that the sheriff had, how did we get there? And you're telling me that it's above your pay grade to move away from there and take away some of that autonomy. How do we even get here? How do we get to the point where the sheriff has that kind of autonomy?
That's the existing constitution. So how the constitution was formed.
The Constitution actually precedes the county. So in the order of laws, the highest law you have in your state, well, of course it's the federal law, right? Well, when we talk about state law, the highest law you have in your state is your state constitution. And when we're talking about local government bodies, then have local government ordinances and counties. The sheriff is a constitutional body contained in Article 11 in the same area that describes the County Board of Supervisors, and it's its own position. So when you're asking how did we get there, we got there in 1872.
1872. And we amended. Has it ever been amended?
The Constitution.
1872.
California, yeah.
It has been amended.
What you're saying is possible.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave you with the impression it's not. It is an entirely different proposition than what we're doing here in Sacramento County. But I have a question. Sure. Yes.
Okay, and I don't understand how is it that this man, Scott Jones, has so much power that he can go around what you guys want and go around what the voters want, and there's no consequences for him. There's got to be some way that he's held accountable. Like, for instance, the accountability, that's ridiculous. His stats right now is ridiculous. 77, he's not doing anything. 185 homicides, they only solved 86? Either he needs to be out. There should be.
I think you just said it.
Can we what they call him, impeach him? Can we impeach him?
No, seriously, I think you just said it. I mean, ultimately, accountability for any elected person at any level of government is determined at the ballot. Yes.
To follow up, is it actually possible to impeach him?
You can recall.
How we recall? What's that number?
It's a petition.
You have to get signatures on a petition.
Okay, how about you, sir?
So basically, what surprises me, I mean, it doesn't surprise me, right? I mean, when they started a lot of these laws, they were there basically to impact people. And it's been going on for years and years. And we could go to the Board of Supervisors and put pressure on them, and there's only so much they can do, right? So what we got to do as a community, do what they did 392, right? Monday we'll be signing the press conference, it's going to be law, hopefully the governor signs it, and now these cops will be held for murder for a lot of the murders that they were doing on black and brown communities of color, right? So now, bearing the situation, we know what the problem is. My question is, we're right here at the Capitol. Like, I'm organizing with leaders from LA, San Diego, Sacramento, and we don't have a strong Sacramento presence.
No, we don't.
And there's a lot of organizers here. I've been working with a lot of community here. There's a strong movement building here. And it's like, how do we start building communities and working on laws to hold these people accountable and change laws that hold the DA accountable and these folks accountable for everything that they've been doing to our people for all these years, all the way from the 18 months. They're out there and they need to work on that, and that's our focus should be.
Yes.
Right?
And
by changing policies at the Capitol, basically.
Okay, one more question. In the back?
Like organizations to get things like recall or get someone else voted in or just change the Constitution. Okay, so we have those ideas. But you guys have one enforcement mechanism, that's budget. So is there any political motivation to pull the budget? Cut it in half, gut it. I mean, is there enough will? Because maybe only and so then you don't have political will, but you guys do have purse strings, and you can say, if you're not going to cooperate, we're not going to cooperate.
Sure. Hypothetically, absolutely. The Board of Supervisors, if, for whatever reason, the Board of Supervisors during an annual budget hearing cycle, which is, May and June, had a lot of concern about, a whole host of things that were associated with that particular agency, absolutely, we can totally pull that. But then you're left with the fact that now, if you pull it in its entirety, now you've got no resources to carry out, law enforcement.
What resources? They ain't doing nothing now. Are they doing nothing now? They ain't doing nothing now. It's not working well.
You can do it.
It's the same thing they've been doing, nothing.
It's not working for us.
Yeah.
You said that AB 1185 is in the right direction. And then you say that this sheriff is so independently elected and has more fucking power, excuse me, but has more power. The budget is where you nailed him, and the other part is we have to get together, not just all of these independent groups, a solidarity of people.
Yeah, unite.
They have to listen to us. That's what I'm getting from all of what I've been learning since last year. Actually, since 2017, when my friend's house was hit again by somebody hunting, a policeman hunting people at night, and her property gets damaged again by the city of Sacramento, and then lies that it was the suspect's car. I'm sorry. I saw two things. I I saw the direction of the wheels that came in, and I saw the other direction of the house. And it was definitely coerced to try and get that guy to stop. He wasn't the issue. It was the SAC PD. So we need to get together, people. Put our egos aside. Got to. Recall.
Anyhow, I want to thank everyone for having me tonight. I want to thank you for your activism. You know, I know all of us on the board of supervisors have different levels of engagement with the community we represent. We have different styles, that's for sure. But I would hope that my record and my open door policies for meeting with you, making sure that I hear your ideas or your grievances, even if it's a tough discussion, that we can continue to have the, I think, the productive back and forth that we've enjoyed here tonight. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
And just a quick announcement for all you folks. So September 13th is kind of like our day.
Right, the legislative session closes September 13th. We've had a lot of really great questions about how we got in here and everything like that. And AB 1185 is the right step in the right direction. It's not everything, as we heard today. But it is on the Senate floor right now. The session closes on September 13th. So one of those action items are to do the activism that we've heard Supervisor Serna talk about and you people talk about.
We're in unprecedented territory. So, you know, even though these laws have been in effect since 1800s, we've never had anyone who had the lack of ethics that we're seeing now. So this is the reason why we're in this position where we are, where everyone's kind of just finding out about it. And I just want to say, I don't want to put them on the spot, but we do have a member of McCarty's office here, and I just want to ask you really quickly, is there anything that the people here can do to fortify this bill, to come out? Is there any specific actions that are in the works right now?
Sure, yeah, I think, doing what you're doing, calling your elected representatives, emailing folks, telling folks that this matters to you. Because I think the more folks that we get telling their senators specifically that this is important, the better. I think just keep doing what you're doing. It's been, we've been working with the ACLU so far, it's been really helpful. I'd say just keep doing what you're doing.
So here it is, folks. Civic engagement. If you have any other questions, we can take them afterwards. Thank you, everyone, for coming out.